Testing, testing, 1, 2. Can you guys hear me okay? Good afternoon. Oh, come on now. We're at a Shinny conference. We could do better than that. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
There we go. There we go. I know it's the afternoon. We're going to make this panel discussion as exciting and energetic as we possibly can. My name is Maurice Coleman, and I'm your moderator for this afternoon. And as Elizabeth Taylor said to her next to last husband, I promise you I'm not going to be up here too long, right? So we really want to have an exciting discussion talking about joint venturing, and specifically joint venturing and the partnership to look at ways to end homelessness. We've got a dynamic panel. I'm going to introduce our panelists, and the format is going to be pretty simple. First and foremost, after I introduce them, they're going to take a few minutes to give you some context, some ideas around what they do, who they are, why they do it, so we can really develop the discussion. Then I'm going to ask a couple of questions of our panelists after they give their presentations and their discussions. And then I'm going to turn it over to you. And we're going to really get down into the nitty-gritty and start talking about what it means to really joint venture and hopefully get some really valuable lessons learned out of our discussion. So let me just quickly introduce our panelists. First, to my immediate right, Mr. Arlo Chase, who's the Senior Vice President for Real Estate and Property Development for Services for the Underserved, SUS. Give him a round of applause. Right next to Arlo is Karen Sherman, who's attorney at law for Sherman Law. I've known Karen for a number of years. Can we give her a round of applause as well? And then finally, our third panelist is Benjamin Warnke, who's a principal with Olympic Community Development. Had a chance to work with Olympic and look at several deals. Again, we've got an exciting panel. Ben is a wealth of knowledge as well. Can we give him a round of applause also? So again, without further ado, we're going to get right into the discussion. Arlo has a presentation that we're going to kick things off with. And again, we'll follow that up with some discussions after all the panelists present, and then we'll hear from you. Okay? Arlo.
Thank you. Great. Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks to Maurice and our other panelists. So let me just do a quick pulse. So how many not-for-profit social service agencies do we have in the audience? All right, vast majority. For-profits, government, banks. I see my title company, Neil Falcone, in the house. So any other title companies? Great. So we'll focus on the not-for-profit side, which is good because that's where I'm at right now. And Karen specializes in representing not-for-profits. And Benjamin's a not-for-profit at heart, even though he's turned to the other side. Thank you to Robin and Shinny for hosting us with this luxurious post-lunch slot. Robin promised us we would be the only finance panel this time, but of course we have Marian Zucker and Ralph Fasano, right, competing with us. So, Robin, always a pleasure. Maurice said he was going to buy espressos for everyone, but only if you sign up your next Bank of America deal at the same time. So no. All right. Well, I have worn a lot of hats in this industry. I was an attorney representing for-profits and nonprofits. I worked for the State Housing Finance Agency, and I worked with Benjamin at Alembic prior to coming to SUS. So I'm a fixture on the joint venture panel. In fact, they might start calling it the Arlo Chase seat. No, so I'm going to do a quick, Maurice really, and I think he's right, wants to focus on the discussion, so we're going to try and, have to bore you with the usual slides, but we'll try and run through them quickly and just get to the meat pretty quickly. So just very quickly about SUS, we are a social service agency, pretty broadly focused on people with developmental disabilities, mental illness, homelessness, HIV, and often multiple of those issues. We've been around since the late 1970s. In 2014, we merged with Palladia, another social service agency that focused on addiction treatment and homelessness. So we've sort of broadened our scope into those areas. We have gotten pretty big. We're 2,000 employees with about almost $190 million annual operating budget, which you'll see here. We are a fairly significant owner of real estate, including almost 100 buildings, 15 of which are developed with low-income housing tax credits. And those include a number from the Palladia portfolio, which were mostly rehabs, and then about 6 or 7 new construction deals with SUS. We have a number in the pipeline, mostly in joint ventures. We are doing some development on our own, but a lot of it is in joint ventures, one prominent one with Benjamin and Alembic. So what I want to just quickly give you, the point of my, doing a dog and pony show is just to give you a sense of, there's a pretty broad range of joint venture models out there, and I just want to touch on each of them. And it really depends on, and it's great to have so many nonprofits in the room because this is really geared toward you, analyzing your own organization, your staffing, and what your goals are in terms of why would you be wanting to joint venture? Why would you be wanting to get into tax credit development as opposed to the more traditional, DASNY-funded programs? So we have 3 sort of basic models, and there's a lot of variations, especially with the co-development or the turnkey. There you can do it on your own, which I said SUS does some of, and there are a number of other groups, CAMBA, Breaking Ground, a number of other groups that do it on their own. Traditionally, the HPD supportive housing loan program did a lot of solo deals with not-for-profits, but that was back when there was a lot of city-owned land that they would pair with the 9% credits and and their loans. As that pool of land has dried up, I think you're seeing less and less social service agencies do development on their own. So that turns us to other models of development. And that ranges from, you can be 50-50 all the way, so to speak. You could do, share the acquisition and finance risk and construction risk. You can do something like a turnkey, which is something that Benjamin's firm really specializes in that they will often take a majority of the construction and acquisition risk and then turn the building over to the nonprofit for long-term ownership after it's been leased up and converted to permanent financing. And then one final sort of the minimal, the least amount of participation you could have in a tax credit deal is you could just be the social service provider. And I'm sure that many of you are either doing that or have been approached by developers to play that role. And there's sort of 2 variations here. You could just be asked to provide the social services for some segment of the homeless population that the city and state are now either incentivizing or in many cases requiring to be part of larger development deals. Or you could serve as the quote-unquote HDFC, Housing Development Fund Corporation, which is a special entity under Article 11 of the New York State Housing Finance Law, private housing finance law, which Karen can bore you ad nauseum about. But this is a special entity that you need to get 420C, most importantly 420C real property tax abatement. So in this case, you can, if you're doing a co-development, if you're really a part of the process, you're definitely going to play this role. You're going to create this HDFC. And the key thing here is at the very beginning, you need to make sure you have an entity that has the provision of low-income housing as one of your corporate purposes. It's been a long time since I was a lawyer, so Karen can confirm the language, but it's something you have to have in your articles of incorporation, your certificate of incorporation, that this specific language to be eligible to create an HDFC and to be eligible for 420C. So that makes you, to have that ability, makes you a valuable partner for for-profit developers. And even if you're just doing the HDFC, that is worth something, and that is worth a fee. I'm not here to tell you what the fee should be, but it should be some fees up front, in the hundreds of thousands or at least 100,000, and then some kind of annual fee for serving as the HDFC entity. And that's if you were just doing that and doing some services which are funded, hopefully by New York 4, or it's whatever they choose to call it at the city and state. So there is this New York City Housing Partnership which plays this HDFC role for many, many private developers, but there's no magic, and they're very good at it, but you can do it as well. And this is a way to be involved in the deal, generate some fee income to your organization, but have a really very limited risk. So for all of you who are just starting in the low-income housing tax credit field, or you have boards that are extremely skittish, or you have really a balance sheet that won't support any form of guarantees, even sort of operating guarantees, long-term guarantees, this is an option that you should consider. The LP, the owner, usually provides indemnification for any kind of construction or operating risk that goes along with you just being the quote-unquote nominee owner as the HDFC. So this is just going through some of what I just said. It really depends on your organization whether you have a housing development staff or even a part-time staff, or want to develop that staff in-house, versus you want to stick to being a social service organization, but you would like to expand your opportunities to provide those services into more buildings. If you want to learn the tax credits, if you want to try, if you're a little bit more risk tolerant, if you can learn the tax credit program and what it means to take compliance risk, then you could consider doing a turnkey where the developer takes, as I said, the construction-related risk, and you start taking operating risk. Basically, the risk there is either that the building completely falls apart financially and you have to make contributions to just sustain operations, or if you screw up in terms of the Internal Revenue Code and start leasing to non-compliant people. Those are the really long-term risks under the turnkey type situation. There are a whole number of ways to try and mitigate risk, which you should definitely avail yourselves of. Number one is to go to experienced partners. That's both developers, attorneys, title companies, bankers, syndicators, all of whom should be advising you, as well as consultants, I should say. I see Maurice looking at his clock, so I'm going to move it along. So just quickly, if you're looking at developer partners and you have choices, which I suspect a lot of you will have, given all this wash of money that's been promised at the city and the state, although, of course, none of it's actually available, but soon come. These are the kind of things as a baseline, what you want to look at in terms of potential partners. I think you want to, as a first time or new entrant, you want to have an experienced developer who has a commitment to this field. There are going to be a lot of legal documents. There's going to be, your lawyers will try and anticipate a lot of the things that happen, but they won't be able to anticipate them all. So there has to be a level of trust with your partner. So that's important. Obviously, experience, and then trust and mutual respect. So pretty much said all of this. So, I do recommend this report that Shinny did. So let me plug Shinny shamelessly on this subject. And we'll do questions later. So thanks.
So we heard a lot about the structure, and one of the key pieces that Arlo just finished with was trust and transparency, right? You could trust people, but we also know that you need to make sure that the legal documents outline what you're actually doing. let's bring Karen Sherman up and talk about things from a legal perspective. Karen?
Can I use this? Yeah. What is it? Turns the audience on and off? What is it?
They're laughing.
I know, yeah, see, I know, yeah. Okay. There, okay. That's me, Karen Sherman. Hi, and I'm shorter than Maurice. I'm just gonna take a call.
But she's tall in stature, clearly.
Right, right. Let's see what time. Yeah. I'll put it here. So, good afternoon to you too. I have a different question to start with. So how many people here have done a LIHTC deal? How many have done a joint venture? And how many have no idea what we're talking about? Okay, so I've been introduced. Basically what I do is finance transactions of supportive housing predominantly, and finance with low-income housing tax credits and taxes and bonds and federal home bank board money and Maurice's money and anyone who'll give my client money. And sometimes it's like, we got $4.58 from another grant. Let's get it in this deal. You know, and each time you have more money, it's just more layers. And actually, it does cause more work, but it's what makes these projects work. And unfortunately, they don't work just with some nice, simple HUD grant money that we all historically have memories of and feel very nostalgic about. That ship sailed when Congress decided that they really didn't want to finance housing, and the only way they were willing to finance housing was basically to create this vehicle called low-income housing tax credits, which gives the investors, meaning the banks and certain insurance companies, not you or me, the benefit of $1 off their taxes, not a deduction, but a credit for each amount they invest. And what else do they get? They get losses, and they also get CRA credit. And they get to advertise the community how wonderful they are. And they really are, Maurice. I'm not saying that. Just forgot who was at the table there. And they really are. I mean, it's not without risk. But in New York, we're very lucky because we have a very strong market. And we actually demand more money than they get credit for. So for every $1 of tax credit, we ask for $1.14, $1.20. We actually ask for a lot more. We don't get it. That may be the theme of joint ventures. So as I was saying to some friends earlier today, joint ventures, everybody says, start with a joint venture because you sort of learn as you go, little training wheels, not a lot of risk. Well, that's all true. But the problem really is if you've never done a transaction before, not like the rocket science, it's difficult to negotiate something if you have no idea what's on the plate. So the question is, what is the menu of these things that you're negotiating? And it's really important, we were talking about trust, it's really important to trust that your joint venture that you select, one, shares with you all that information. If you're working with someone and they don't share with you the underwriting and the spreadsheets and the cash flow and the development costs, that's really not a joint venture. It may be your social service provider or other things, but you're not in a joint venture. If you're going to share the risk and share the responsibilities and the benefits, you need to be able to see everything. So I'm going to, since we weren't totally coordinated, because we didn't do this before, otherwise, yes, the chase seat, you know, we'd be coordinated. Does this really work? I don't know how that works. Oh, this is a little pointer. I see. So I just go this way? Okay. I'm going to skip through some of the slides because Arlo already covered them, and we'll just go. Did I say the wrong? No, yeah. So we'll just go to the next ones. So what is a joint venture? First of all, if you're sitting at the table together, you should have some common interest. And you should know that you have some similar goals. Now, the joint venture may be a not-for-profit. We're not saying it's necessarily a private developer. There may be a not-for-profit in your community that is maybe they're in a different catchment area, maybe they have a different specialty that wants to joint venture with you. Maybe you have a contract or certain supportive service dollars or other things you do with your constituent population, then it makes sense for two nonprofits to joint venture together. But often it is a private developer that will be approaching you, or you will be approaching them to joint venture. And so being in a joint venture means truly, I mean, although there are all the other elements of it, that you're supposed to share some decisions and share some ownership and share risks, profits, and loss. And basically, you're responsible for each other's acts. Generally, it's just a one-shot deal. You often don't see the person again. But if you're really successful, there may be multiple ventures in the future with the same partner because you've worked out the kinks and you're really able to develop this project better as a team than you were yourself. So moving forward, just move forward. There we go. Let's go back one. Okay. So the first thing, folks come in, they say to the attorney, I can, by the way, if you want, bore you with the New York Housing, Private Housing Finance Law, Section 42 of the Internal Revenue Code, and Section 40B of the Internal Revenue Code, and all the regulations they're under. But I don't think we're going to really address those here, but do reserve those questions if you want for the end. So often people come in and say, somebody approached me and they want to joint venture with me. Isn't that great? And here is the agreement. I go, okay, so I've got 15 pages of narrative. What did you agree to? Well, it's all in there. Well, to have an agreement, first you need to sit down and know what the terms of the agreement are, and then you write them together. And what I usually recommend to someone is, if you're going to a joint venture, take out a pencil and a paper, and let's just start with the bullet points. Don't put it in a paragraph where you can't see it or you don't really know what it means. Let's just go from the beginning. So basically, what is the project we're talking about? The size, who's it going to serve? Is it a population that I care about? Is it in the neighborhood my group cares about? Where are you getting your money from? And you'll see later on, I'll talk a little bit more, what kind of guarantees are associated with that money. Is there any requirement, as the lenders may have, for having a minimum net worth or having some liquidity during the term of this agreement? And do you have that underwriting? And underwriting is that spreadsheet that tells you, what's the budget line items, who's going to be paid what, when the money's coming in, and at the end of the day, what are the operating costs of that project and whether, in fact, it cash flows. Will there be positive cash flow, negative cash flow? Are there reserves? And one of the things you may care about is there a social service reserve? Your social service providers, in some of these transactions, requirement for social services, and what if that contract doesn't exist or it's late? Have we ever heard of a government contract being late? Let us turn the page. Now, what can you control? So before you make this decision, you have to have a sense of, again, what's on the table. What decisions need to be made? Well, you have to select the development team. You may, as a novice not-for-profit joint venture, have no idea what's going on, and I might suggest to you that you retain counsel or consultant of some type to basically explain what you need to decide. I mean, you as a group, and you meaning the board. If you haven't invited your board in early on, you're making a mistake. The board has to early on understand that you're entertaining this and get comfortable with the risks. These are not intuitive deals. It takes a while and take many times back to most boards for them to understand and be comfortable with the level of risk that you're assuming, or no level of risk, depending on how you structure it. The no level of risk means really you're not all that involved. If you're going to be involved, there will probably be some risk. So, development team. So who is that? That's the architects, the lawyers, the contractors, and specifically as social service providers. My clients care about the construction. They understand their tenant population, their tenant needs. They know whether they need hardier finishes. I have no idea what hardier finishes means, but they do. So they understand, what does this project need to look at? What kind of community facility do I need? What kind of administrative services offices? So if the not-for-profit social service provider is going to have a large portion of the population in the project, they're going to care about what it looks like. And also what it looks like translates to how the neighborhood feels about it and the reputation of the not-for-profit in being part of the project. And then you want to know, where's the money coming from? We talked about that briefly before. Operating decisions. We've already discussed ownership briefly, so who's going to make decisions on the operations, the social service providers, how will the project be owned, and who will manage it at each stage. That was already discussed by Arlo initially, so I'm going to skip over a little bit. So when decisions need to be made early on, some decisions, once you make them, they're gone. You know, your financing sources, your social service providers, those decisions are made, who your contractor is. There are other decisions that maybe can be made later in the process, but you need to know when you need to decide. One of the big fears of private developers is you don't know how to make a decision. And so they get very nervous whenever you say, I need a little bit more time, I have to talk to my board. Again, you need to understand internally the process your organization and the timing your organization needs to make decisions, and also to explain to them you really don't have a lot of time. If the project's in construction, it needs to be brought in on time, on budget, and if they need a change order or change directions, they can't wait a month. The contractor has to proceed, or there's real guarantee and monetary risk. You want access to the books and records. You want to participate, most importantly, in all meetings. So if you haven't done this before, one of the ways to learn is to make sure someone on your staff is really going and following and tracking the process. It's easy if you're there to learn. You'll hear the same things repeated over several meetings, and your staff will have the opportunity to really learn and make sense and translate this project to you. So I'm going to skip over who owns what, because we already covered that section. And my next thing is, well, where's the money? So where is the money? Okay, so there's development fees. You've all heard about development fees, but there are two kinds of development fees. There's kinds that come in by the time construction is closed, generally from the equity contribution from the sale of tax credits. And there are development fees that come in during the cash flow process. As you operate it on each year, if there's excess money, that would be paid out for development fees. The budget will include a line item for development fees. Throw in a technicality, development fees count towards basis. Tax credits are counterintuitive. You need to spend the money in the budget to get the tax credits. So if you save money, it's not always so good. You need to spend the money. The development fees need to be paid. You guarantee that payment by the end of the project. But if you are the joint venturer and the private developer says, fine, you can have 25% of the development fees, you care about when. Are you getting your development fees from construction, or are you getting them from cash flow? It makes a big difference because cash flow is tentative, and construction, usually you will have them. Construction, often the JV might be the contractor, so that generally is not going to be your money, although sometimes you might want an owner's rep, depending on what kind of control you will have over the building after the construction completion, that you want to make sure the building's built to satisfy your specs and requirements. Property management, there are fees. Partnership management, which is really a technicality, managing limited partnership, making sure the tax returns and reports are done. There's what's called an incentive management fee, which is a little excess cash at the end, and social service fees. Those are your basic fees of sources of money. Then the question is, how are you going to allocate them? That's a negotiation, and we already talked about when are you going to get them. Are you at risk? Am I at time?
Minutes.
Okay, I can talk fast, so don't worry about that. So are you at risk? When are you at risk too? Funds for startup and operation, generally you're going to be looking to the private developer to put that up, although there are sources of those funds should you decide to go off, and they often may want you to approach those sources like Corporation for Supportive Housing, Leviticus funds. There are funds available for pre-development money that may be more accessible to not-for-profits. Guarantees to equity investor. Often the private developer will say, I will guarantee construction, and I'll guarantee that's complete, but you know what? You take up the lease of guarantee. Because after all, this is your market. You know who the tenants are. So you take the leasing guarantee. Well, that sounds easy, but actually it's not so easy because there are a lot of requirements that you must meet to satisfy the 42 of the code, which is the tax credit provision, and also requirements to satisfy the regulators as a type of population this is to serve and the source of referrals. All that takes time and sometimes experience to work with the social service agencies to get your tenants on a timely basis. So if you're taking the lease-up guarantee, you need to make sure that you've locked in enough time to be able to satisfy that guarantee. And you know what? Any experienced private joint venture developer will understand that. When you ask for that, they'll say, obviously. But if you don't, you may not get it. There are guarantees to the lender. Generally, if you're dealing with the city agencies, that's not an issue. But as money is becoming scarcer and there's private debt, that's usually a guarantee that you should be looking for your private developer to do. And the regulators will want the parent entity, the sponsor, to basically say, hello, I guarantee that this will be X type of supportive housing for the period of the regulatory agreement. And that is the not-for-profit's guarantee to make sure that that is done. And then you will be signing that. Something else to negotiate is when is it over? Well, when is the joint venture negotiation just not going anywhere? So you need to build into your agreement ways of parting. And if it does successfully complete, there is something called year 15. The equity investor wants to leave. They've gotten, hopefully, the benefits they want, and hopefully they want to leave. And so there's what is called a purchase option, and the question, who has the right to buy the limited partner's interest at the end of the 15-year initial compliance period? Compliance periods are at a minimum of 30 years and now usually are required by the state or city to be 60 years. And that is a negotiation as to who's actually going to be able to buy that interest at the end of the day. And lastly, we're here, haha, put it in writing. If it's not in writing, it doesn't exist. And if you don't understand how it's written, really, I mean, if the attorney's writing it or consultant, you really need to say to them, I don't understand what this says. You really need to understand the document. It should be clear. It shouldn't be using terminology that is, obscure. So put it in writing, and what you'll see, the writing, where will you look? That's term sheet. It'll be a joint venture agreement. There'll be a development agreement. And in the ownership structure, there'll be operating agreements that explain it. Now, remember, at the end of the day, you don't always get what you want. So you don't always get what you want. The question is, did you get enough? If you didn't get enough, if it's not right, if it doesn't feel good going in, generally it won't feel good going out. So, and sometimes, maybe it's not the deal you should do. One last thing, and part of the, Robin's heard me say it, in the industry itself, the not-for-profit itself, as you've already heard, brings many benefits to the project. They get low-income housing tax credit priorities, they get loans, there's many benefits, sales tax, real estate tax exemptions. But any 501c3, pretty much not-for-profit, provides that. So as an industry yourself, you have to think about if a private developer is shopping the market for what is the least costly joint venture. Do you want to be the least costly one? And what does that mean for the quality of the supportive housing services that may be provided in that project as people shop through the not-for-profit to find the least experienced one or the not-for-profit who started yesterday?
Thank you, Pam.
Oh, I have one last.
Okay, so as you can see, we have a wealth of knowledge here, and we're getting into the nuts and bolts of this discussion now. We heard a lot about know your role, what you're agreeing to, selecting your team, ownership, operating, decision-making, making decisions quickly, tracking the process, developer fee, timing of it, construction cash flow. The next person I want to bring up is Ben. He's got a ton of experience in doing all of this with Olympic. Ben, please come up and share your thoughts.
I don't have a presentation, or I don't have a visual presentation, so bear with me. It's great to be here. I'm somewhat astonished by the number of people I know in this room, and I'm a little dismayed that most of them that know me seem to be sitting in the back of the room. So I just have to get one thing off my chest, and I skipped my 35th college reunion this weekend, in part because I didn't want to feel old, and I've been sitting here looking at this billboard for the Phantom of the Opera, which in itself should make you feel old, but the advertisement to the publicitist thought that it would be appropriate to say, let your fantasies unwind. Unwind? That is an old man. Anyway. So Alembic is what I call and what other people would call a double bottom line community development organization, meaning that we have two basic goals. One of them is to make a profit, which we sometimes accomplish, and the second is to make a difference, and I hope we're far more successful in that realm than we are sometimes in the realm of profit making. We see our role in large part as providing capacity to nonprofit organizations. So we attempt to work very closely with the nonprofit community-based organizations that we partner with in order to help them realize their vision for their communities or their constituencies. We provide capacity. We're in a position where we've done a lot of work in this realm. We've developed 14 LIHTC projects. We've developed over 900 units. We've developed 7 supportive housing projects, a total of 535 supportive housing units with 7 different nonprofit partners. But at the end of the day, it's about the people that live in those buildings and the communities where those buildings are located. And we're good at what we do. We know the financial world. We know the state and the city. We know the investment community. But we don't know how to provide services, and we don't know the communities where most of our buildings are. That's what we rely on the nonprofit sector for. And unhappily, we live in a world that places greater value on what I know, in many cases, than what you know. And what I know, you can learn in places like this. And what you know, you can't. And I would, if I could say one thing to you in the nonprofit world, I would say, don't undersell yourselves. It happens all the time. And the number of organizations that get, a new board member comes in and says, I'm from the private sector and I know this and I know that, and they don't know anything. So I would say that when they know something. They know different things. I would just say that, to us, that's the joy of this work. The joy of this work is working with people that are in communities and working with constituencies and making a difference. And part of the joy is trying to figure out how to work together. And it's not always easy. And in part, that's because our interests are not always aligned, but that's what you have lawyers and consultants for. But none of it sort of gets to where you want it to get to unless there is sort of a bedrock belief that we're all bringing a value to the table, and that value needs to be respected for what it is, and it's equal. And if you're working with somebody who doesn't believe that, there are plenty of people out there that do. So I would encourage you to search for those folks. I'm going to just sit down now.
Okay. I told you we were going to have a wealth of information and get into a pretty robust discussion. So, it's hockey season, finals, right? My son's a fan. Wayne Gretzky once said, great hockey player, you miss 100% of the shots you do not take, right? So my first question for our panelists, Arlo, Karen, Ben, talk about how does a not-for-profit know when to take their shot at a joint venture?
You saw
Hamilton. I did. Great play. So from the legal perspective, financing perspective, and lessons learned. Arla, maybe you could kick us off. In 2014, you guys merged with Palladia. Talk about that piece and then the partnerships relative to knowing when to take your shot.
Sure, thanks. The Palladium merger was, a much, much bigger endeavor that I would caution hesitation before endeavoring on again. Not that I was at any means driving the ship at SUS or Palladia, but it's an interesting point and sort of analogy. I mean, there are unfortunately, more not-for-profits. We've been involved in a number of, for lack of a better word, rescue type situations, particularly in the DD world right now, frankly, where a number of organizations are either going bankrupt or being forced to close, and not just in the DD, in the MH world as well. So, and there's a panel actually at 3, the next panel about organizational survival, and Sea Change put out a really gloomy but illuminating report about that. So I'm sort of digressing, but in terms of when to take your shot, I think there is, you don't want to undersell yourselves for sure, and I think that point gets made over and over at Shinny, and it's a good point to be over and over made. At the other hand, I would say, having been on the for-profit side also, there's often no magic bullet that the for-profit is hiding. Again, that goes to the level of trust. There's, if they are being transparent with you, if it feels, the deal may not seem so great. It may be a couple $100,000 in fees over the first 5 years, and you sort of think, well, that doesn't seem so great. And, I can get my social services somewhere else, or I can do them somewhere else. I don't think, for all of Ben's prowess, they're not going to be buying condos in 157 at Alembic either. So don't sort of romanticize the for-profit side of it either, because it's not. People certainly make a good living, but there's not this magic pool of money that when you get away from the 501c3 status. So I guess that's all to say. If you want to do the work, get a partner you trust. The risk feels tolerable and there's some upside, and then I would say jump in, because you will, as Karen said, we've done a number of repeat transactions with for-profit partners at SUS, and I would say that each deal gets better, both in terms of the negotiation but also the availability of funds.
So Karen, you mentioned size of project, tenant population, sources of financing. Are those key pieces that help you decide when to take your shot as a not-for-profit or a for-profit getting
No.
into a partnership?
No. Am I on the mic? Yeah. Okay. I think the first conversation is with your board. Look at your organization, decide why you want to even develop. Some supportive housing groups have scattered site. You're not protected by rent stabilization under some of the leases. Rents are going up disproportionately to the subsidy. And you might say, I need to be able to take these into a different fold because I am raising money basically from grants to achieve the mission that's supposed to occur from contracts. So that may be one reason, but I think you have to really look closely what is. You may have an opportunity that there's land. Someone gave you land, you donated land. By the way, land, you basically are in the driver's seat nowadays. If you can get that land piece, you're negotiating in a different seat than if you don't have the land. So that's another piece. But I think it's really where you are with your board and your growth and your organization. And first, you need to look at that. And I think when you take the shot after that, because you've decided to move forward, is that you've got a partner who's going to be transparent, who's inviting you to the table, that you really understand and you're gaining knowledge. And I think the money is probably less important as long as you're covering your expenses anyway, because I think of it as the learning moments, like going to college in a development deal. And you want someone who's going to let you be at the table, listen to all of it, understand it, and that you're getting something out and you're covering your costs, but you're really looking for the education to see where you are in the future.
So Ben, we talked about these particular components, but really, doesn't it boil down to the golden rule? The person with the gold makes the rule, right? So isn't that the ultimate deciding factor? You mentioned double bottom line, mission. There can't be a mission without margin. So is it really about the money, the driver, to decide when to take a shot as a not-for-profit or for-profit partner?
Well, I guess the way that we approach it is from the belief that it's possible to be fair. And if you are willing to put all your cards face up on the table and you have a partner that's willing to do the same thing, then you can have a conversation. And the conversation needs to take into account as much as possible. So, you know, guarantees, who's bringing the property, who's doing the work, who knows the community, who's got resume money from the city council. I mean, all the different components that make up development in this city and this state. You know, it's, you never can figure out what lies ahead, but it's usually in this business unpleasant. So you might as well start from a place where you're both feeling like you were heard and that the deal feels okay to you. And if it doesn't feel okay to you at the beginning, it's really unlikely it's going to feel okay to you anywhere along the line. All that said is, you know, as when to take the shot on a development deal, if you have a piece of property, come talk to us.
So you're talking, you sat down, you're trusting. Arlo, Karen, Ben, talk about what happens when things go wrong. How do you manage through the difficult times? Do you follow up and look at your operating agreement? Do you go back to the original spirit of the partnership? Talk about the downside. Give the audience some sense of, we know what happens when things go right? Everyone celebrates things, kumbaya. But what happens when things go wrong, and how do you navigate those danger waters?
Yeah, that's a good question and important to think about because things will go wrong. They'll either be small things or big things, and hopefully it'll be small things. But again, that gets back to just what Benjamin was just talking about being transparent and trustworthy and having a belief that your partner is going to carry forward with that level of conversation during the hard times. I mean, I think the hardest time, I mean, and Karen and Ben have seen more deals than I have. For me, the hardest thing would be if a construction really went way awry, and there are some examples out there that I've heard very recently of joint ventures where the construction's gone way awry. And the good thing I'm hearing is that people are stepping up and doing the right thing vis-a-vis the partnership. But you know, that's where the metal gets tested, so to speak, because that's when there can be pretty significant financial hit. You know, look, Ben and I have done projects. First of all, I worked for Ben, but then we have done projects where one of them is going great. One of them we just kind of parted ways. You know, it wasn't the most fun of a conversation. But, you know, I'm still going to look at his firm for the next deal because we have a level of trust and respect. And, you know, it was, you know, again, it wasn't a fun thing that made us part, but it was handled, you know, as well as it could have been.
Karen, you want to opine on that?
I was going to say, feel like Miss America, please repose the question. No, okay.
Okay.
Okay. I think if you really, in the beginning, kick the tires, understand the terms, and you understand the agreement, I have found when things have gone off tread, you know, a lot of it's that iron rock in the Bronx I keep hearing about. There's this rock that cannot be broken. I think it's kryptonite. And we never can tell you. We all know the South Bronx is difficult because usually the problem is getting out of the ground. So the question really is when you're looking at the partner, who are you're looking at usually a JV who is a contractor or maybe a consultant, is how deep their pockets are. Because in the agreement, they're going to be the ones you're looking to step up the plate. And most of them have stepped up to the plate with the funding needed to get the project done. But I think that's part of your due diligence early on to make sure that you have a contractor who is bond worthy and who also has some other funds in their pocket and strength that if something happens, and unfortunately we don't have x-ray vision, we do try, that they are willing and are going to do what is right. Generally they will because they want to stay in this business, and we're a very small community. Reputation is almost everything, including yours. So if you're particularly uncooperative as a not-for-profit, I don't think you'll see anybody knocking on your door till there's a change in regime. And similarly with a private developer, if they decide that they're no longer going to be developers in the city of New York or use any government funds, they may not be cooperative. But if they want to stay as part of this process, that is really the pressure of the community on them, that they can't go back to that door unless they make it right. So I think that's part of it. It's a lot of community pressure also and making sure everyone steps up to the plate.
Excellent. Ben, anything you want to add to that?
Yeah, I would just add that the times, I mean, obviously, you will run into difficulties, and the times where we've run into difficulty and haven't managed it well, or the process hasn't gone well, is probably the way my partners would want me to put that, is when the decisions about the development team weren't made jointly up front. So for example, the project that Arlo was referencing, neither one of us was involved with the decision about the choice of a contractor. And the nonprofit partner brought the property and brought the contractor really as part of the deal. And in hindsight, that should have been a bit of a red flag because it wasn't worth it. And I think that when things go wrong, the natural instinct is to point fingers, and to point fingers at the people that you don't know and that you didn't bring to the table, right? Except for my family, where we point fingers at each other. But that's not usually, or maybe that's always the case. But in development, at least, it seems to me that if you've all come together and said, we're looking at 5 contractors, this is the person we're choosing, we're looking at 5 consultants, and there is unity at the outset about everybody around the table, everybody of importance around the table. When things go south, you're a team to the best of your ability, and it's very helpful to be a team when you run into rock, or is anybody from Con Ed here? I'll leave that reference aside.
So to that point, last question from up here, then we want to turn to you, so get your questions ready. But to that point, when we think about credibility, capacity, and character, those 3 C's, right? Bank of America, we've been fortunate, like many of you in the room, to work with a lot of different not-for-profit partners, CAMBA, Concern, The Bridge, Lantern, just to name a few. But when you think about those 3 C's, credibility, capacity, and character, can you talk about how important they are relative to selecting the team? To your point, Ben, development team, general contractor, lawyer, banker, clearly we know the agencies. How important are those 3 pieces, character, capacity, credibility, to selecting a team in a joint venture partnership? Feel free, Arlo, to kick it off a bit.
Go ahead.
Yeah, you need those.
I would say, for me, the interesting thing here is, and the thing for you all to be cognizant of, is that The development partners are often going to have multiple deals going with the same partners.
Right.
And so there's trading going on
Right.
that you may, even the best of your intention partners are doing because they have 3 other deals going with that contractor or that syndicator or that bank. And they're going to be trying to leverage everybody wants new business. And so they are going to try and use the fact of new business that they have that to dangle to get some other favor. And it's just, is nothing necessarily nefarious about it, but it does make you as a not-for-profit sort of coming into this business a little bit at a disadvantage to that. I mean, Ben speaks very, it's true that, if you have 5 on a list and you go interview them all and get references, that's a great process. It's often hard to do that from a timing perspective, but that is the ideal way to do things. But for me, the interesting thing is how those other deals affect the deal that's going on in front of you.
That's right. That's a great point. Karen, anything you want to
I
add?
agree entirely.
Okay. Questions from the audience? Thoughts, comments? Sir, we'll start here.
My name is David Kong. I'm a social worker at Area Free Living. We just recently started a supportive housing unit. My understanding is we co-own the building with a for-profit company. It's Bosket Management. And they are kind of acting as the landlord, and we are kind of the social service provider for the time being. I think there's a push for us to we kind of own the land. I think that's the kind of thing. Mr. Arlo, you mentioned like the bullet point of the, you need to have shared commitment and experience and things like that, and mutual trust. But what I'm seeing in our partnership is kind of the trust is there, the transparency is there, but Foxy has never done supportive housing before, no experience, and I think the commitment part is kind of it's been challenging a bit, because they're a little bit in over their heads a little bit, and we are too, and kind of dealing with that. In a lot of ways, it's like we don't know how to check the tenants who have mental illness, and we need to get them to talk about the rent. So like you guys do it because you're social workers, and then the building will have repair issues. Like, well, we're social workers, you guys deal with the building thing. So like that's kind of been the interesting challenge there in some ways.
Okay.
I was wondering if you had
So,
There's a lot of interesting things to say about that. First of all, that Jeff Fox is in the audience from Foxy Management. Your co-owner is Alembic, by the way. And your contractor is sitting up here, George Raptis. Wave ahead. So, yes, this is, you guys could have a team meeting, right? And I worked on the deal when I was at Alembic. So this is really.
have a mediation at the back of
let me
the
just say,
room.
the property management is something we always skip and
Yes.
so crucial.
Well, that
Actually,
was
the
the next
fight
point.
I was
Yes.
referencing with Ben and I's organization for a fight was about property management. It wasn't about development. It was
Yes.
about lease up. We
Yes.
screwed up. We leased to some over-income folks, full disclosure. And
Yes.
but management is a very hard job. It's hard enough on just a straight LIHTC deal. And if you throw in the supportive housing
Yes.
with the additional restrictions on who the units can go to, and the interplay between the social service agency and the property management company, even SUS, when we're the same, we don't get along. So it's totally under-discussed in these sessions, so a lot of great questions there.
well, can you also look at it, both Ben, Karen, Arlo, what happens in that scenario when you have to do more? So you signed up to do X, your partner to do Y, but you find yourself doing X and Y. Can you talk about that dynamic? How does that shift things? What does that mean in terms of looking at deals moving forward and thinking about that partnership again, or not thinking about it? Can you talk about it from that perspective?
I mean, I don't know this deal, so I can be
In general,
uninvolved in
just
my.
your experience.
There's a lot.
person in the room.
Yeah, there's a lot of sensitivity, and we're going to have a get together in the back. I've got candy. There's not a problem.
Got
We're going to
coffee.
soothe things. I think there's a masseuse on the 10th floor. Okay. Right. I think they're probably. I'm just going to make a surmise. When the not-for-profit came in and was doing the tenant selections, and I've worked with not-for-profits that selected tenants that have been and I'm not really sure what happened, but it was supposed to be the population, but I heard the landlord-tenant bill for the first year and a half, and I gasped.
Wow.
I said, how could that possibly be? It's a brand-new building, and the landlord-tenant bill is bigger than the entire transaction
Landlord-tenant
cost.
attorney you're referencing.
What?
Landlord-tenant attorney you're referencing.
Yes, the
yeah.
landlord-tenant
The bill
attorney.
for bringing
Yeah,
people
for
to
bringing-
housing court.
You know, it's the first year and a half, and you've got a fully occupied building. What went wrong in
Right.
the lease up? So I think if you're new, I think it's incumbent upon you to go to your colleagues who specialize in this area. I mean, people do hire folks who are better able to screen and have experience and know what they're looking at. You know, what it says on paper and what's going to work as the right tenant population and mix. Maybe too, you know, and how you balance those. I mean, certain of the tenant populations may be very needy, and how many of those can you take compared to other people so that the building's balanced? I think you really just need to talk to your peers and colleagues. But similarly, if you're having a leak on the roof, you're going to go to the expert on who did the management, the property management. If they don't know, then they're going to have to, I think, look to their resources to bring in an expert. So I think you're looking at who has the best pocket of knowledge or access to the best pocket of knowledge, because just letting the issue or the problem sit and fester just means you'll have a project at risk, and that's really dangerous.
Other questions from the audience? Richard?
Two-part question.
Yes.
Having to do with your board. One, how do you get the board comfortable with affordable housing? And two, although you mentioned specific language for changing the purpose of your corporation, is there specific language available? I hadn't thought of that before.
I'll let Arlo talk about how you get the board comfortable. Sometimes you won't. It's probably the answer on that one. So there's, in order to get what is called a 420C real property tax exemption, which is 100% tax abatement for low-income buildings that qualify, the ownership structure is such that one of the entities, the general partner, has to be owned at least 50% by an entity that has in its purpose clause exclusively to develop housing for persons of low income. Years ago, you could finesse this with the HDFC and other things, but now they want the sponsor to have it. Frankly, I've had clients who are supportive housing clients, and we provide housing for the homeless. And as my client said, who ever heard of a homeless person who wasn't low income? It's not good enough. So homeless, just saying you provide housing for the homeless will not do it. You have to have that language. It's a simple amendment. It'll be approved by the agencies that need to run it through. It's not difficult to get. So that's the certificate of incorporation issue.
It's not difficult to get, except if you're 2 weeks away from your closing and your bank is wondering what's going on. So, no, you're right. Any able lawyer can do it, but just do it. In terms of the board, you know, I think it's a good question, and definitely Karen, I think, makes some great points about bringing them into the process early. You're not going to want to go your first, you know, bring to them 6 months, you know, you want to start talking early on and about the idea before you bring a deal. So you want to bring the concept, you want to bring some training. There's consultants, lawyers who will do trainings for your board, bringing them to Shinny. I bet Shinny does a lot of work, and Robin could maybe mention that, around board education and how you bring a board on. But I think, you know, there's no magic bullet. It's about doing it early and, you know, going in steps and not springing stuff. I mean, our former CFO at SUS said, always tell the board they've seen this before, because they never want to hear something's new. Like, remember that you approved the purchase of this land 5 years ago. So now this is just a little thing, you know, we're just doing the financing now. So, I mean, I'm being a little bit cavalier, but it is about talking to them on an ongoing basis about it.
I just want to add one thing. So in order to get financing from HPD, you need Inspector General clearance. And HPD does have, and it's important for your board to know, they can form a housing committee. I mean, as a lawyer, I frankly have some issues with it, but they're happy with it. So basically what it is specific language, and you can look it up online, or you can email me and I'll tell you where to look. It's on the HPD webpage. You can look where it says 420C. And basically, there's a housing committee, and what the board has to say is, for this transaction, we delegate to this housing committee the authority to make all decisions. I mean, to me, your board had initially approved it, and then there's a further delegation. And then the housing committee takes it from there. So when you get to we got $14,283,072 on the financing here and there. People don't, they don't want to sit at a board meeting for 2 hours to understand it. There's a small group of 3 or 4 who can get comfortable and translate it back to the board, a group that the board is comfortable with.
Right, that's a great point about that your board also, either the housing committee, if you form one, or the entire board will have to submit these onerous disclosure requirements to HPD, which, depending on what your financial situation is, and hopefully some of us have some board members with some complex financial, on the good side, complex. If they own real estate, it can be a very, very time-consuming and intrusive process. So there are certainly board members who will not sign these things, will not fill them out and sign them. So that's where the housing committee idea comes. So that's another reason to start the conversation early, is to and circulate what the form will look like.
And those board members may be some of your economic strength on grants and everything. You don't want to lose them. Hard to get good board members.
Gentleman right here, and then I'll come over here.
You talked about, when it's over, how you break the EJB. I get for breach purposes, but can you give an example or two about by consent? I mean, is it as simple as I want out, or are there some other stipulations or things we need to think about?
So you're saying before you do the deal? Before you've actually closed? So you're chewing it all over? On almost every joint venture agreement, they usually have the bottom line that's not binding. And so that's the bottom line. It's not a binding agreement. How often do you want to, how far out do you want to take that non-binding? It makes me really uncomfortable, because to do these transactions, people have to spend money.
Right.
And whether it's your money or the private developer's money or bank money, I think you have to be really fairly comfortable. But I have seen private developers shop, and before, you're just dealing with a term sheet, and I've gone as far as with one to the board, and they went to someone who, frankly, was less experienced, asked for less. I didn't ask for anything, frankly, because they'd never done a deal before, and they were only a couple months old. So they were left at the altar, is how I felt about my clients. I actually said to the person, don't you take your date home who you bring to the dance? I mean, you didn't call me back. You didn't say it's over. You said nothing. You just left me here. I mean, he was a little shocked by that, but that's sort of how I felt my client was treated, that they were taken to a dance, and all of a sudden he went to the bar and met somebody else,
At least want to drop him back off home. That's the key takeaway there. At least that. Give a handshake, then you can move on to the next opportunity. Great question. Gentleman over here, you had a question.
Karen, this is for you. I keyed on one of the pieces that you said about if you're not taking on any financial risk, there's not much else that you're going to be doing in the deal. I work for Rainbow Housing Corporation. We're the nonprofit GP in 4 different states. New York not included in that. But we're seeing more and more, particularly as California, they got rid of all their shell nonprofits a few years ago, and the hot water and the THCA found themselves in last year, that more states are requiring material representation from nonprofits. And that can be anything from, financial reviews to board access. We define that as providing support of social services, meeting those compliance pieces. But is New York trending towards that as well, or is that something that you see, particularly in abatement situations, that the state's not necessarily focused on?
I think the state should be focused on it. I don't really think they are. I think in the social service area, because of the services provided, that it's difficult. I mean, you're just not a placeholder. I mean, or you shouldn't be just a placeholder, because you're bringing more than just your status as a 501c3 that I say that any not-for-profit can do. You're bringing awards, you're bringing the Reso A money, you're bringing a continuum of care for the population that the syndicators are scared to death of. They want guarantees that this population is going to have social services and be stable. They don't understand it, and they don't want to understand it. On the other hand, and I've actually said years ago to someone, is it good enough you just hire a not-for-profit and they're the placeholder and you don't have a social service provision and they own 50% of the general partner? They're not the managing member. Is that good enough? Are you selling the 501c3 status? Is it subject to an audit by the IRS? It doesn't feel good to me, but that's from my law professor side. No one else seems to care about it, and they're not disturbed about it. And to the extent they are disturbed about it, I think it's more the private sector who's saying, well, gee, why do I have to go through all these hoops just to get this benefit? They're really just signing on the dotted line, and I have to pay my money. So there are legislative proposals right now to allow affordable housing for-profit developers to get the same benefits, other than the tax credit set aside, as not-for-profits with respect to certain kinds of tax abatements. I don't think mortgage recording tax is yet on the table, though. So.
Other questions from the audience? If not, I've got one. So we talked about the beginning of the process, sort of pre-development, the construction and development. Now let's talk about once it's done, you got TCO, you're converted, and you're working with the population, that property management piece. Can you talk about it from the perspective, Arlo, Ben, Karen? How do you unwind the relationship as you have now completed the birth of this new project, right? And really reflect on, if you can, your experiences from lessons learned as you've gone through each phase of the project to getting it to completion.
Yeah, I think, like I said before, the lease up has gotten more and more difficult when we're talking about, back to the old days of the HPD supportive housing loan program, and it was tax credits and HPD money and private and city-owned land. There was one funder, basically. There was no bank. There was a syndicator and HPD, and that was it. Now we're talking about most of our deals have multiple sources. They have bank debt, either a lot of now more and more on the permanent debt side, which is really a whole new world for our industry. And with the growth of Section 8, we have a project with NYCHA-based Section 8 that brings in we have HDC, HPD, NYCHA, and OMH. I see Bud Isaacson in the audience. Hi, Bud. All of them with their own lease-up procedures, teams, requirements. Thank God that project is ahead of construction schedule, because I think it's going to take us 8 to 12 months to, it's 140 units, but it's going to take us a long time to lease that project up. So I do think, and Karen said this, there are companies that specialize in lease up, and SUS does do our own property management for the most part, but we are willing to hire another firm to help us with it because it's become so difficult. So that's that piece of it. In terms of getting the, if it's a turnkey situation and the for-profit switching over, it's usually not as quick as you think. You think, oh, turnkey, TCO, maybe lease up. But usually what the agreements, at least that I've been in or seen, usually have release of the for-profit from any guarantee liability or payment of some high percentage of their developer fee before the control or they get out. So in that case, it's really going to be, you're talking about 4 or 5 years, from the start of construction before the control is really going to flip.
Okay. Karen, Ben, your thoughts?
I think Ben's more involved with that.
I guess what I would say is that it's not precisely on point, but what we found is that the lease up and conversion process is sometimes the most difficult and time consuming, and that I would say when we began our development business 10 years ago was not what we anticipated. And we thought you get to construction closing and you pick a great contractor and you're done. And what we found is that it's sort of like moving. You move the couch and the tables and the bed and you think you're done, and then you open up, the shelf underneath the sink and there's all this stuff. And in the development at the end of development, getting your TCO and getting all the rent up to a place where you can actually convert is like that. I mean, there's like a toilet brush wherever you look, and so I think that that's that. I mean, to sort of get back to a slightly earlier question in terms of one of the things that you want to make sure when you're embarking on a partnership is that you have a partner who is willing to do work and willing to do. It's like having a good, colleague in the office. They do more than just what their job description says, because there's going to be a lot of that out there.
Excellent. Excellent. Final questions from the audience? Okay, panelists, here's the hard one. You all have a number of years in the field and looking at many deals, supportive, affordable, combination deals. What is the greatest takeaway you would give to this audience when you look at your experience about joint venturing, for-profit, not-for-profit, not-for-profit, to not-for-profit? What is the lesson learned that you would share with them as the sort of the parting nugget of wisdom when you reflect on your experiences?
So I would say two things. One, you have to allocate staff time, even if you're playing a very minor role. You have to, and you hire a good consultant, you have to have someone on your staff dedicated to that transaction and understanding it. And then the second piece is just what I've said before, is really focus on the lease up and management of the building up front.
Excellent. Kat?
It takes time to understand this, and so it's somewhat echoing up front. As I said, you don't know what you're negotiating unless you spend some time. If you spend some time, you still might not really know what you're negotiating or the consequences of what you actually got. So I think it's very important that you have someone who's willing to go through the documents. I know everybody hates doing their tax returns. It sounds like a dirty word. This has nothing to do really with tax. You're not really reading a return. But you do have to read your operating documents and at least know where things are when something comes up. You don't have to know the answer, but you have to know where the answer would be.
That's right.
You have to have somebody willing to say, I don't understand that. There's no such thing as being stupid in this business. I still read a paragraph and go, I didn't want you to ask that question. That's like the minutia that nobody understands except for this one guy, and he's in Chicago. But you have to be willing to say, I don't understand that. Explain it again. Use different words, like when you're skiing, your instructor says go this way, and say, I did, but it didn't work, so they tell you something else and it works. So you need to have somebody fairly confident in your staff in their own ability to learn, so they're willing to kick the bucket, ask the questions, and speak to their colleagues about their experiences and be able to say, I don't know how to do that before it's too late.
Excellent. Ben.
I'm going to echo a little bit of what Arla was saying, in that the projects that are the great projects are where you have a partner who's at the table with you. They don't need to be there all the time, but they need to be there ideally enough so that they understand what's going on. Because there are going to be moments when things, as we've all said, and as you know, go south. And it's great if you don't have to start from the beginning, so that the person who's sitting at the table has an understanding of the process. And these things take forever, right? They take, we talk about them taking forever, that they 3 years or 4 years, but 3 years or 4 years is a long time. It's how I was in college for longer than 4 years, but most people aren't. And, for that period of time, you want to be with people that are engaged with you and that you feel are listening to you and that you like. And so, on the upside, there are people in this room that I look at and I smile because we spent 5 years together. And it was, you know, and at the end of the day, we did something great, and we had a good time together. And why not aim for that?
So joint venturing, just to summarize, some cliff notes here. One, we heard today, this afternoon, if you're a not-for-profit, invite your board in early and remind them that you already shared the information with them. No surprises. Know your role, know what you're agreeing to. Feel free to hire the right consultants and the right team to help you understand that. Selecting a team that you can trust, that values you, is critical. Ownership. During construction, clearly during conversion, property management is critical, and knowing what's in that operating agreement. Decision-making. If you're a not-for-profit, getting there quickly. Getting your board to decide, understanding a lot of money is on the table, and time is money. Tracking the process. Getting that person on your team that's not afraid to get down into the minutia and to understand where the process is and to raise their hand and say, I don't know this. We need to call that guy in Chicago, right? Developer fee. When am I getting it? During construction, through cash flow? Is it fair given the value I bring to the table? Land. If you own it, you're in the driver's seat. It's a good thing. Remember the golden rule. Person with the gold makes the rule. Land is clearly the gold. Finally, we learned, last but not least, trust and transparency. That's critical into thinking about any partnership. You know, Helen Keller once said that alone we can do so little, but together we could do so much. I want to thank Robin, Cynthia, and Laura, and the entire Shinny team for putting together this great panel. And clearly, let's give our panelists a big round of applause. We are right on time.
Well, great job, Maurice. Also, we have everyone who asked a question gets a piece of candy.
There you go. Kit Kats and Frost. Thank you.
Actually, I just ran out of my card, but I'm happy to send you an email. Okay, and I have a website, so Karen Sherman will be able